Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schatz will join us later in the program. On the show tonight, the city has been without a watchdog for 5 months, but that could be changing soon. Sources say the mayor will finally name a replacement for former Inspector General Joe Ferguson.
To have Republicans essentially trying to tear apart this agency of government.
The group that decides when people with criminal convictions can be released is in limbo. Our Spotlight Politics team has details. And Hetty Weiss joins us for reviews of the latest on Chicago stages, including actor Sean Hayes and his homecoming show at Goodman Theater. But first, some of today's top stories. Chicago COVID cases are on the rise, but the city's Department of Public Health says it is in, quote, good control of the outbreak. The department says the city has seen an uptick in cases and positive tests, but that the levels of both were well below previous pandemic peaks. Chicago's top doctor, Allison Arwady, said in a statement, quote, I am pleased that 1 month after lifting the universal mask mandate and vaccine requirement for certain indoor public settings here in Chicago, the city remains in good control. It goes on to say it is not surprising to see a slight increase in cases as behavior changes, but we continue to monitor closely. And relief is at hand for at least some Illinois homeowners who have fallen behind with their mortgage payments. Governor J.B. Pritzker and the Illinois Housing Development Authority announced more than $300 million is available in the state's Homeowner Assistance Fund to aid homeowners who are behind on mortgage payments and related housing expenses. Homeowners who need it can apply online for up to $30,000 in assistance. Communities hardest hit by the pandemic will be given priority. The deadline to apply is May 31st. A federal judge has dismissed a lawsuit that sought to stop a portion of Jackson Park from being transformed into the home of the Obama Presidential Center. Former President Barack Obama and others broke ground on the $500 million center in September, even as the group Protect Our Parks continued to sue to block its development. The group contends the center would irreversibly damage the park and the surrounding environment. Mayor Lightfoot today weighed in on the lawsuit's dismissal.
Very pleased that the judge dismissed the state law claims, but there's a piece of the litigation that continues. Briefing will happen here in the coming weeks, so I don't want to say too much more. But, as you know, we're moving forward. Shovels are in the ground. You can see the framing of some of the structures that are already happening, and we're excited about the progress that's being made.
And Protect Our Parks founder and president Herb Kaplan says the group will appeal the ruling. Up next, could Chicago soon have a new watchdog? We share the details right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Sources say Mayor Lori Lightfoot may name a new city watchdog soon. This after more than 5 months since the last Inspector General left the job. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. Heather, who do we think the mayor is going to be choosing, and what do we know about this person?
Well, sources say that Mayor Lori Lightfoot will tap Deborah Witzberg to serve as the city's next Inspector General. She was the #2 official in the office of the Inspector General under former Inspector General Joseph Ferguson. She was in charge of the office's Public Safety Division, which was created in the wake of the police murder and outcry of Laquan McDonald's death. Her job was to oversee efforts to reform the Chicago Police Department, and we expect the mayor to make it official tomorrow.
Okay, so we know that Witzberg, as you mentioned, is replacing Joe Ferguson, who didn't necessarily have the best relationship with the mayor, to say the least, but I think there's something to be said about that relationship as well. What do we think Witzberg and Lightfoot will be like?
Well, we expect them to have a somewhat tense relationship. The mayor has been highly critical of audits that Witzberg participated in and oversaw in her previous role, especially of the Chicago Police Department's handling of the protests in the wake of the police murder of George Floyd in the summer of 2020. Deborah Witzberg's last major audit was one that found that Chicago police officers disproportionately stop Black Chicagoans and are more likely to use force against them during those investigations. So there will be a lot of opportunities for the two to clash.
I'm sure you'll be keeping an eye on it for us. Of course, that's all the time we have now, but viewers can read Heather's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And now our thanks to Heather.
Thanks, Brandis.
And of course, you'll stay right there because the rest of our Spotlight Politics team will join us right after this.
Thousands of Puerto Ricans are taking to the streets to protest massive blackouts.
Over the years, Mexican culture, from food to music, has become woven into the city's tapestry.
Medical professionals share the latest recommendations on COVID-19 booster shots.
DACA recipients have been facing longer delays than normal in their status renewal.
Little Village is one of my favorite neighborhoods. This neighborhood comes together to celebrate such an important day in our culture.
Chicago makes a bid to host the 2024 Democratic National Convention. What a WTTW investigation reveals about Richard Irvin's campaign for governor. And a newly minted alderperson, Nicole Lee, makes history as the city's first Chinese-American city council member. All that and more with our Spotlight Politics team. Welcome back, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. So let's start with this first bit. Chicago being eyed as a potential host city for the 2024 Democratic National Convention. Amanda, what makes Chicago appealing for this?
What makes Chicago particularly appealing is that we are a blue city, a blue state, frankly, in a sea of wishy-washy, of purple. And so that is where Democrats say, hey, we could come there. We're in the heartland. You're in the Midwest. By the way, Republicans are eyeing as one of their top choices nearby Milwaukee as a spot for their convention. And so that's really what makes Chicago exciting, is you have a base. You have a lot of players. Also, by the way, of course, you have a lot of hotel rooms and restaurants, the sort of things that you need just from a practical basis to carry out a huge event such as this. So it would be certainly something that would be huge for the city if that were to happen in terms of dollars. And after COVID, a struggling hotel and convention industry, struggling, by the way, more than elsewhere, this would be huge for Chicago.
And don't forget the history. You've got Grant Park in 1968, Richard J. Daley, and then 1996.
But is that the sort of history that makes Chicago attractive, or the opposite? You do sort of have to wonder about those 1968 references and whether that would be one of the reasons Democrats might say, we want to evoke that in this day and age.
Heather, what could it mean if the city does host?
Well, all you have to do is look back at the remnants of what happened in 1996. So the convention took place at the United Center, which was basically brand spanking new at the time. It really kickstarted an effort to revitalize, some would say gentrify, the west side of Chicago. I think there's an argument to be made that the West Loop would not be the destination for restaurants and shops and apartments and condos that it is today without that 1996 convention. But there was a lot of baggage left over from 1968, and there's no doubt that Chicago officials, led by Mayor Lori Lightfoot and Senator Tammy Duckworth, who's the vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, will have to overcome some drawbacks. You know, they will be forced to answer questions like, will the conventioneers be safe in Chicago, which of course is experiencing historic levels of crime, as are many cities across the nation. So this is by far a bank shot. There's no telling sort of what will happen, but it would be quite a coup for Chicago once again to be the location to nominate the presidential candidate in 2024. Of course, everybody expects that to be Joe Biden running for a second term, but we all know politics in Chicago ain't beanbags, so literally anything could happen.
So Paris, you've done some reporting about Aurora Mayor Richard Irvin and how political donations to his campaign flowed to companies that ended up being awarded municipal contracts and benefits. What questions might this raise about his campaign for governor?
Well, it raises questions because Irvin is a high-profile candidate due to the support from Ken Griffin, the state's wealthiest resident. He has deposited $20 million into his campaign account, and he has promised that Irvin is the guy to clean up the pervasive corruption in Springfield. You just saw Mike Madigan appear on Zoom before a court in an endless parade of indictments, federal indictments from state lawmakers. So what we found with Mayor Irvin's pattern in Aurora was that there were tens of millions of dollars in contracts and tax incentives that went to companies that did happen to donate to his political funds. We noted one in general, Scientel Solutions, which is a telecommunication firm. It gave over $135,000 not only to Irvin's mayoral fund, but then to a political action committee run by Irvin's campaign manager, mayoral campaign manager. And then that political action committee gave $50,000 to the campaign of Irvin's former law partner, Brittany Pedersen, who's running for Kane County judge. So I have to say, we have to clarify, there's nothing that we found that are illegal about these donations. We saw that they were all within the legal limits, but they raised questions because when a company donates so much, we saw them donate through employees, through a spouse, to different funds. They're kind of spreading those donations apart to stay within the law. So a lot of questions.
Paris, what's the reaction been?
Well, we saw some heated reaction yesterday, expectedly, from GOP rivals. One, Gary Rabine, saying that he likened it to Mike Madigan. Others saying when, we've seen what we've seen in Springfield over the last several decades, that this kind of behavior raises a lot of red flags. So no doubt this is going to be a thing that his rivals, who are much lower funded, are going to jump on. Irvin controls the airwaves because of all the money that he has. So he's going to have an easy time defining himself, and these other candidates are going to have a hard time getting traction of their own.
Now, as we heard earlier, the lawsuit against the Obama Presidential Center being a portion of Jackson Park, that was dismissed by a federal judge. Heather, does this rejection come as a surprise?
It does not. The judge in this case, Judge Robert Blakely, has ruled several times in favor of the city and the Park District, which granted a lease to the Obama Foundation to build this center. Now, it's important to note that the center is already under construction. This was really the second attempt from Protect Our Parks to sort of halt this construction. And the judge said, nope, you don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to state law. Now, Protect Our Parks also has a pending lawsuit on appeal that claims that it violates federal law. Of course, the center is in Jackson Park, which is a nationally protected landmark and status. So this isn't the end of the road for the legal challenges that the Obama Foundation has faced to get the center built, but it is one step closer to resolving these issues that have delayed the center from really many years at this point. At one point, it was supposed to open in 2021. Now it won't be open probably until 2025.
It's been a long time on that one. So City Council unanimously confirmed Mayor Lightfoot's pick Nicole Lee to fill the vacant 11th Ward seat earlier this week, making her the first Asian American woman to serve as an alderperson. Here's some of what she said after being sworn into office.
I know that I'm in exactly the right place at the right time. At this time in history, to be a part of this body, to help lead this great city, as well as to represent every single member of the 11th Ward, the storied 11th Ward of the city of Chicago.
Heather, what impact is she looking to make in her new role?
Well, she is making history just by her very presence on the city council. She is the first Chinese American to serve on the city council. She is the first Asian American woman, and she represents the 11th Ward, which will change significantly under the next ward map to include all of Chinatown and to include a majority of Asian American voters, regardless of what happens between the tussle between the Black Caucus and the Latino Caucus. She says that she's going to focus on two things: public safety and getting through the backlog that has been left since former Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson was removed from the city council more than a month ago after he was convicted on seven federal charges.
Now, we also know that her father, Gene Lee, was convicted of stealing more than $90,000 from a charity that worked to help children and teens in Chinatown. Heather, was this part of the discussion with City Council?
Well, she was asked about it twice by reporters. Once at the press conference where Mayor Lightfoot unveiled her pick, and Mayor Lightfoot physically stepped in front of Nicole Lee to admonish the reporter from the Chicago Tribune to say any question that he asked should only be able to be answered with, "I love my dad." Now, Nicole Lee got the question again after she had been sworn in, asked what she learned from her father's legal troubles, and she said that she had learned the importance of taking responsibilities for one's actions. So it was clearly an issue that she was prepared to be asked about, and she acknowledged that it was really a formative event in her life. She still lives in Chinatown in the house that her grandparents bought. So this was clearly part of sort of what called her for public service.
So meanwhile, two of Governor Pritzker's appointees to the state parole board are out of the picture. This after one resigned and the other was rejected by state Senate Republicans and some Democrats. Here's a bit of Pritzker's reaction.
Now, to have Republicans attack them and their character and their biographies, to have Republicans essentially trying to tear apart this agency of government. I mean, this is what the GQP has been all about, tearing government apart. I think we ought to stand up for the integrity of the people that get appointed and the very tough decisions that they have to make. But obviously, we're going to move forward and keep the PRB operating as best we can.
Now, Amanda, Pritzker pinning it on Republicans there, but Democratic senators also voted against this nominee. How common is it for a nominee to be rejected?
Well, so we haven't had a lot of action. Really, this has been pushed off, I think, because there was recognition that it was going to be troublesome for the Pritzker administration. What you heard there, GQP, by the way, is apparently a reference, not a mistake, that instead of GOP, QP for QAnon. So Pritzker really going after Republicans. But as you noted, Democrats control the Senate. They have a supermajority there. They didn't like these nominees either. When you had folks resign, it's because they weren't going to get approval, confirmation from the Senate led by members of Pritzker's own party. So really, the takeaways here are, number one, that crime is clearly a political concern as politicians are looking ahead to the next election. That is something that Pritzker, by the way, has recognized. He has had some words that were not quite lashing out in that manner, but nonetheless, sort of around the bend, accusing Kim Foxx of being too soft on violent criminals. So there's that. And then also what it means for the Prisoner Review Board here, because not only does it mean that there is not enough of a quorum on this board to decide when those who are in prison should be eligible for being let out. Also, those who do not abide by their parole, this is the board that brings them back into prison for those violations. And there are not enough people on this board to make those decisions, which means criminals who violate their parole could be out free.
Important roles that those folks serve. Okay, that's Spotlight. Thanks to Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. Up next, to the Chicago stage with theater critic Hetty Weiss. But first, a look at the weather. Theater in Chicago is in full bloom this season. Joining us with some springtime recommendations is theater critic Hetty Weiss. Welcome back, Hetty. Good to see you. So let's start with Sean Hayes, a Glen Ellen native. Of course, he is known for his role in Will and Grace. He portrays Oscar Levant, not Levant. Remind us, who was Oscar Levant?
Well, for people who lived between the 20s and the early 60s, they know him as this multi-talented guy. He was a wonderful pianist. He was a champion of Gershwin's music. He was a writer. And then he also was, he appeared on late night TV and other TV programs. And this play, Goodnight Oscar, is set in 1958 when Jack Paar, the host of The Tonight Show, wanted him to be one of the guests on the program's first broadcast from Hollywood rather than from New York. And so everybody was watching, and this is the key to the story is the fact that he got Oscar Levant got a 4-hour pass from a mental institution, which is where he was, and not for the first time, because as he said, there's a thin line between genius and insanity, and I've crossed it.
So do you think this show is headed to Broadway?
Oh, I definitely do. And you know, there was kind of a secret on the first night that we weren't supposed to really divulge, but everybody knows now. At the end of this really very well-written play by Doug Wright, Sean Hayes sits down at a grand piano and plays Rhapsody in Blue live, perfectly, brilliantly, and it's a stunner.
Because, surprise, he is a master pianist, which, I mean, I think people have seen him play piano, but maybe not knowing that he's got that talent that he has. So next up is Stand Up If You're Here Tonight, which is an interesting title. What is this show from the American Blues Theater all about?
Well, the title kind of gives it away a little bit. It's about the interaction between, it's a one-man show. It's the interaction between a guy who is really lost, a middle-aged guy. And I think it has echoes of the pandemic, that he's so isolated, and he really, but it's also about the relationship between an actor who also, wasn't working during the pandemic, and the audience. So it's about making connections, and he does actually try to make connections with the audience that's right there in front of him. And, people who don't like to participate, he's very conscious of that. That's the playwright John Coldenbach makes that clear. But occasionally, people do something, they stand up or they hum or they, do something else. But it's a fascinating interaction. And the actor who does an absolutely brilliant job is Jim Ortlieb, who is familiar probably to theater-going audiences in Chicago from years ago, but then he's moved on to TV and Broadway and films, but he does a brilliant job.
And you don't cover a lot of children's theater for us, Hetty, but you made an exception for Winnie the Pooh, obviously. That was at the Mercury Theater. Is this a winning Winnie?
Yes, it's great. It's great fun. And I have to say, the Mercury Theater, everything they're doing these days is really on a high level. This is Disney's Winnie the Pooh. It's kind of an adaptation in some ways, a live adaptation of the animated Disney film from the 1966, I think it is. And there are life-size puppets for all of the animals, but they're operated very visibly by actors. And each of these puppets has so much personality that, you really understand it. And they have all the characteristics of human beings. I think that was the charm of A.A. Milne's original stories. You know that you can talk about it as animals, but they're human animals. So, and there's a wonderful bear and all of the other, Piglet and Kanga and butterflies, and just, it's very well done. And I have to say, the thing that really impressed me was the audience I went to was, I would say, a good 1/3 to 1/2 really tiny tots, sitting on risers and sitting on parents' laps. And there wasn't a peep. And usually, in children's shows, the parent has to go out and, settle them down or whatever.
To the potty or.
Exactly. And there was total attention for one full hour.
And that says the kids must have been actually engaged. And I want to thank you for putting the warning at the end for parents. There's going to be some merchandise on display that little people are probably going to demand. So come ready for that.
Finally, yes, there are. Big display.
Before we let you go, Hetty, we've got King James at Steppenwolf. Now, the title character, NBA star LeBron James, not actually a character in this show, correct? Tell us about that one.
Exactly. I mean, but he's the king to the two guys who strike up a friendship based on really their fanatic fandom for this guy. They both are Ohio natives, and they're really rooting for their team, the Cavaliers. And then at some point during their friendship, LeBron moves to Miami, and one of them is very, very insulted, and the other one says, that's the way life is. But then there's also the development of the friendship between these two guys. One is black, one is white. One is kind of a always failing entrepreneur, and the other one wants to be a screenwriter in Hollywood. And I won't say who actually succeeds, but it's a fascinating story about really jealousy and friendship and fandom, and it's extremely well done. Just a two-actor play, and a very good DJ who does all the intervals, which is another good piece.
So it sounds like the DJ, maybe the music, are the third character in that performance.
Well, not during the play, but during the intermission and before and after, and it really sets a good mood.
Good to know. All right, Hetty Weiss, hope to see you at the theater. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Brenda.
And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. And we leave you tonight with shots of a new addition at Brookfield Zoo, a porcupet. It's a baby porcupine, y'all, born earlier this month. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.
Wednesday night on PBS, starting with nature.
A horde must be defended, even if it means fighting for it.
Followed by Nova.
Oh my God, you're my sister. I just couldn't believe it.
And Expedition with Steve Backshall Unpacked.
This feels like I've just uncovered some extraordinary treasure.
Nature, Nova, and Expedition with Steve Backshall Unpacked.
Next time on Jay's Chicago, song and dance.
A longtime nightclub performer still playing when we met her at 102. A Chicago man who was Bob Fosse's dance partner as a kid. A beloved musician's story of deep depression and recovery in the time of COVID. And a virtuoso